Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing well. Today we are going to look over the cases of two unsolved murders that happened in the same town, and they were only a couple days apart. And what is really unusual about this case is both of the victims had the same name. They were both named Mary Morris, and that is highly unlikely, especially in a very large city that they lived in. And I just found this case really sad and quite interesting, and it's really wild to me that it just hasn't been solved, that there just wasn't, enough evidence and things like that. But I thought we would go ahead and look over the details of this case because it is quite intriguing. On October 12, 2000, a woman named Mary Morris left her home in the suburbs of Houston, Texas, and she was leaving for her job. She was a bank loan officer, and she never arrived to work that day. And throughout the day, her job tried to get into contact with her and, called her home, and her husband eventually answered, and he was surprised that she never arrived to work because she wasn't home, and she left for the morning saying that she was going to work. And at around 5 p.m. when Mary never came back home and she never reported to work and never called her husband to let her know what happened, or never, called her job or anything, he reported her missing to the police. And the next day, on October 12th, an ATV rider was riding along this long path that was leading to Mary's home. It was like a very long stretch of road. It was about 3 to 4 miles, and he came across a body, and the body ended up belonging to 48-year-old Mary Morris. And the body was so badly charred, it was beyond recognition charred, that they had to use tooth fragments to identify her. No theft took place out of Mary's car or in her purse. All of her money, a checkbook, anything important was still there, and there was no apparent motive for this murder. Everybody in Mary's life really loved her. She was very well liked at her job. The customers loved her. Her co-workers loved her. She had a really great family. Her husband was crazy about her, and there just seemed to be nobody in her life that could possibly want to hurt Mary. So this left police completely confused and really giving them no leads to start off with at all, because nobody seemed to have a problem with Mary. So they, of course, began looking very closely at her life, because sometimes, things are strange, and we find out really bizarre things about victims sometimes, that they carried on a double life, or that they had like an affair that nobody knew about, but they found nothing on Mary, and they quickly ruled out her doing anything shady, or not that that's a cause for her being murdered, but they quickly ruled out anything that she could have done that put her in a bad situation. They found nobody in her life that could possibly want to hurt her. And of course, this investigation led nowhere until a few days later, on October 16, 2000, a nurse also named Mary Morris was leaving a local drugstore, and she became very worried because she felt like somebody was following her. She just felt this presence, and she started seeing somebody driving somewhat close to her in the car behind her, and she just felt very nervous. So she made a 911 call to her local police station, and as the operator was listening to this call, you could hear somebody being beaten very badly and just being hurt and eventually murdered. And once the operator alerted the police, they dispatched and went to Mary Morris's latest location that they could track down with her phone, and they found her body located inside of her car, and the perpetrator of this murder made it appear as if it was. Mary was found along a long stretch of wooded road, and she had been shot. And of course, when a murder happens, police initially look at the people closest to this person, and more times than not, unfortunately, it is the partner. So police began investigating Mike Morris, who was Mary's husband. Mike told the police that him and Mary were having some marital difficulties for a while before her death, and they just weren't really getting along, kind of arguing quite frequently. And he also told police that Mary was having some issues at work with a man named Dwayne Young. He was her co-worker, and Mary was quite frightened of him. She didn't feel comfortable around him. She found some of her belongings being moved quite frequently, like at her nurse's station. She also found a couple really horrifying notes, and the main note that creeped her out was one that said, quote, "death to her," end quote. And she just felt very uncomfortable, so she asked Mike if he could help her get a gun and possibly teach her how to shoot. So he did do that, and she took some classes and they were practicing together. But besides that, them working together on this like gun thing and like self-protection thing, they really weren't getting along. And that and also Dwayne Young alerted them right away that either one of them could have possibly murdered Mary. Police extensively interviewed Dwayne and Mike. And when Dwayne was questioned, he made it pretty clear that he was not that crazy about Mary, that he didn't really like her. He felt that she was the reason why he got fired, and that very well could have been maybe she went to a superior and maybe like told on him about something and maybe got him in trouble. I think we've all worked with people who do that, people that kind of like tell on you even when you're not really doing anything wrong. So not blaming Mary at all, but that does happen. So he, just made it pretty obvious that he didn't like Mary, but he was very adamant in the fact that he did not do those things to scare her. Like, he didn't rearrange her nurse's station and leave notes to her, and he just basically was so adamant that he did not do this. And so the police did not keep him as a suspect. They did continue to watch him and surveil him for a while, but he ultimately has never really been named as an actual suspect or person of interest because they could not prove that he was there at the time of her murder. He could not prove, the police could not prove that he had such malicious intent to Mary that he would have murdered her. Mike also was very suspicious to the police because, of course, buying her a gun shortly before she was murdered seems rather odd, and that just was a big red flag to police. Also, them having marital problems and not getting along. And also, Mike had a $700,000 life insurance policy on Mary, and it appears that he took it out not that long before she passed away. So that's a really large life insurance policy, and that happens a lot. We see that a lot in murders, when there is a large insurance policy and that person is all of a sudden murdered. So that's pretty common, unfortunately. So Mike was definitely suspicious to the police, but again, they could not prove that he was there. He had a pretty solid alibi as to where he was, but unfortunately, people lie about things, and if other people knew he was doing something, other people could lie for you. And because of the two murders, police were working on putting them together to see how they fit, and we'll talk about that in a minute, kind of how they work together, because it's very unusual to have two people with the same name, of course, being murdered so close together. But it's something that they really try to piece together, and so they felt that Mike wouldn't have a reason to murder that first woman until later on they discovered that Mike made a few phone calls before Mary passed away, that he called her, was on the phone for about 4 minutes, and he claimed that he called Mary, but the police got the cell phone records, and it looked like Mike called another number, and he's claiming that that was just a mistake on the phone company's part. So they took that no further, and I believe that, I couldn't find the exact answer on this, but I believe that that phone company had a lot of mistakes on that report, so they couldn't take it for solid evidence because there were several mistakes made on it, and it wasn't as conclusive as phone records are now. Now they can show you so much, but 22 years ago they weren't quite as good as they are now. So I believe that there was a lot of mistakes on it, with the billing that they pulled up and all the phone numbers that he called, so they couldn't use it, unfortunately. But he did make that call right before she passed away, and they do believe that he called a hitman, but they could never prove it. And there was another separate phone call made the day between the murders to the Houston Chronicle, and this was made by a unknown caller, and they contacted the paper to let them know that the first Mary Morris murder was an accident and that she was not intended to be murdered. And they were really confused by this because at this point the second Mary Morris had not been murdered, and you know, of course it wasn't like published in papers or on the news or anything yet, but this person did want to let, you know, the public know that this first murder was a mistake and it was not, you know, intended for her to be murdered. And the first Mary Morris did have her wedding ring removed. I apologize, earlier in the video that was like a typo on my behalf. She did have her wedding ring removed, which is like a very common thing for a hitman. You see that quite frequently, so they can go to the person that paid them and show, hey, yeah, I did murder this person, so now, you know, pay up. But yeah, Mary's wedding ring was removed, and besides that, though, there was very little evidence that connected the murders. Although investigators do believe at this point, and it's pretty, I feel like common sense, common belief, that Mary Morris, you know, was an accident, just like that caller said. Of course, it could have been a prank or something like that, but it does appear that somebody paid a hitman and they found the wrong Mary Morris. You know, they weren't incredibly far apart in age. They have some similar features. They both have like darker hair. It appears that they're like similar stature, and so it does appear that they found the wrong Mary, murdered her, they went for their payment, and then that person's like, no, that's the wrong person, so then they went and murdered the second Mary Morris. But unfortunately, investigators, they cannot directly link the murders. They have no evidence connecting them. They cannot like prove that it was done by the same person because the bodies were found in such different states. You know, the first Mary was unfortunately burned, and then the second Mary, it appeared to be a suicide. So they were not able to connect the murders. So right now it's still like labeled as like a coincidence, but I feel like most people with like common sense realize that that most likely is not the case, and that the first Mary was an accident and the second Mary was the intended person to be murdered. And now it's been almost 22 years. In October of 2022 it'll be 22 years, and it's just so sad. Like, I feel so incredibly sad for both of these women. You know, the first Mary was just going about her life, enjoying herself, and somebody was like so careless and murdered her like on accident. Like, that's just so sad, right? And even the second Mary, like somebody that she most likely loved and trusted, paid somebody to murder her. Like, that's just so scary. And both of these women met their demise in such a horrific and sad way, and I just feel terrible for both of them. And I believe right now, as of me recording this, I do feel that like this case is still open. I do believe that it's still open. And so hopefully, you know, us talking about it and more people talking about it, it does, you know, bring more awareness to this case. I think that's why like unsolved cases and cold cases are so important, because we do have to, you know, give those people their due. The people that did this crime, they do deserve to go to prison if they're still alive, of course, depending on how old the crime is. But the people do deserve that. The people who are murdered and, you know, their life was taken from them so abruptly, they do deserve that closure, and their families deserve that closure. So hopefully we see a resolution to this case. That would be fantastic, because I just feel so bad for them. Like, that's got to be absolutely horrifying. So thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you made it all the way to the end, you are so awesome. If you liked this video or found it informative in any way, please give me a like down below, and also leave me a comment and let me know what cases you would like me to cover in the future. I'm always interested in hearing what cases you guys want to hear about, or if you just want me to talk about whatever cases I find interesting, let me know that as well. So otherwise, you guys take care and stay safe out there, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.